mysterious in your voice?
I can't alter my voice since I can't produce audio, but I can suggest a way to read it with a more mysterious tone if you're recording it yourself. Hi. Welcome to Macabre Mysteries. My name is Kelly, and I'll be your host alongside a very special AI companion. Together, we're diving into the weirdest, most enigmatic mysteries the world has to offer. From eerie, unsolved crimes to unexplained phenomena, we'll explore the stories that make you wonder and wander through the shadows of the unknown.
Welcome back to Macabre Mysteries and our series on Edgar Allan Poe. The early years, Edgar A. Poe. During a challenging time following their mother's death, their grandfather, David Poe Sr., resided in Baltimore and faced financial difficulties. He had made arrangements to take in the oldest sibling, William Henry Poe, while the younger children, Edgar and Rosalie Mackenzie Poe, relied on the kindness of the community for support. Fortunately, the Mackenzie family, a respected household in Richmond, welcomed Rosalie into their home, and the Allens graciously took Edgar in. John Allen, a partner at Ellis & Allen, a tobacco exporting firm, enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle. As a childless couple, he and his wife, Mrs. Allen, quickly formed a bond with young Edgar, whose charm captured their hearts. As Edgar joined the Allen family, he lived above the Ellis & Allen store alongside Mr. and Mrs. Allen and Moore Valentine, Mrs. Allen's sister. Records from that era indicate that Edgar was embraced by the family, with evidence of their preparations for his arrival, including purchases of a crib and other necessities. While tracing the family's journey during this period proved to be a challenge, historians ultimately succeeded through diligent research and careful examination of letters and various documents. 1 year later, they discovered pieces of correspondence from John Allen to friends, shedding light on Edgar's well-being and Mrs. Allen's health. This exploration not only illustrates the beginnings of Edgar Poe's life, but also highlights the support he received from those around him during his formative years.
Edgar has caught the whooping cough and Frances, Mrs. Allen, has a swelled face.
On May 18th, a follow-up letter indicated that both Edgar and Mrs. Allen were feeling better. On July 26th, a letter from Edward Valentino reported, "I am happy to hear that Edgar has recovered from an attack of the measles." These letters helped demonstrate that the Allens were providing Edgar with what was likely top-notch medical care, alongside other necessities such as services from tailors and everyday supplies needed to raise a child well. On July 29th, the Allens formally arranged for passage to England. Poe was unique among the great American writers of his generation, having spent part of his childhood in England. His first experience of travel, however, was unpleasant. It took 34 days and seemed to induce sickness. The cramped quarters forced John to sleep on the floor, while the women were denied access to the cooking fire and certain areas of the boat. This was likely not a happy time for the family. Upon arriving in England, John's letters continued to report on Mrs. Allen's health issues. A tuition bill dated July 6, 1816, shows that Edgar was sent to a boarding school run by Miss Dubourg. The bill indicates that he had access to a single bedroom and was studying subjects such as geography, spelling, and history, where he was referred to as Master Allen. It is believed that the school left a lasting impression on Poe, as the name Pauline Dubourg later appeared in his story, The Murders in the Rue Morgue. In her letters, Mrs. Allen consistently mentioned her ill health, and Mr. Allen took her to Cheltenham for treatment. During this period, John made the commendable choice to enroll Edgar in a prestigious and higher-quality institution, the Manor House, which was led by Reverend John Bransby. Edgar's experience at the school was largely positive, and Mr. Hunter noted that he flourished in the supportive environment. By the time he graduated, Edgar had developed impressive skills. He could converse in French, interpret simpler Latin texts, and possessed a richer understanding of history and literature compared to many of his peers, even those who had more resources. Mr. Hunter further elaborates on,
"I spoke to Dr. Bransby about him 2 or 3 times during my school days, having then as now a deep admiration for his poems, but Dr. Bransby seemed to shun the topic, probably because his name was used distastefully in the story of William Wilson. Bransby said Edgar Allan was a quick and clever boy if he had not been spoilt by his parents, but they spoilt him and allowed him an extravagant amount of pocket money which enabled him to get into all manner of mischief, and at another time he said that Allan was intelligent, wayward, and willful."
The Manor House School serves as a significant focal point in Edgar Allan Poe's story William Wilson, richly described in a fictional context that encompasses both the setting and its master. Poe portrays the manor as a large and somewhat dilapidated cottage situated in a misty English village, filled with towering, ancient houses and numerous gnarled trees. This description creates a dreamlike, soothing atmosphere that evokes the charm of a vulnerable old town. One can almost imagine the refreshing chill of its lush shrubberies and the thrilling resonance of the church bell tolling, cutting through the tranquil silence and adding to the dusky ambience enveloping the old, Gothic steeple. While this passage is purely fictional, it suggests a vivid imagination that may embellish certain elements of the manor house and the surrounding area. The portrayal by Bransby appears to emphasize the themes of gloom and mystery, effectively creating intrigue through the deviation from the ordinary and familiar. Although William Wilson was published in 1839, it's easy to envision Poe as an individual who was open to absorbing deeper nuances that others might overlook, allowing his thoughts to drift from his studies in Latin or mathematics to the haunting spaces of the old building. Mr. Allen's health was a continuous concern for the family, particularly as their business struggles worsened. The family arrived in Liverpool on June 8, 1820, likely aboard the boat Martha, marking a significant moment upon their return home. Edgar was fortunate to have this experience in England, which contributed to his growth. After a 36-day voyage, John Allen and his family arrived in New York. In a letter, Allen noted, "I intended to leave today, but Mrs. Allen was unwell yesterday, so we had to call in Dr. Horrock. She is feeling better now, and I plan to start tomorrow on the steamboat by way of Norfolk." By August 2nd, the family had settled in Richmond and was in good health. During this second period in Richmond, Poe confronted emotional challenges as the complexities of life for the Allens unfolded. Edgar and his family resided in a two-story frame house, where they lived alongside his partner, Charles Ellis. Charles Ellis's son, Thomas, has shared insights about this living arrangement, illustrating the intricate dynamics of their familial and social connections.
"No boy ever had a greater influence over me than he had. He was indeed a leader among boys, but my admiration for him scarcely knew bounds. The consequence was, he led me to do many a forbidden thing for which I was punished. The only whipping I've ever knew Mr. Allen to give him was for taking me out the fields and woods beyond Belvedere on one Saturday and keeping me there all day until after dark, without anybody at home knowing where we were, and for shooting a lot of domestic fowls belonging to the proprietor of the Belvedere. He taught me to shoot, to swim, to skate, to play bandy, and once saved me from drowning for having thrown me into the falls headlong that I might strike out for myself, but he representatively found it necessary to come to my help or it would have been too late."
Mr. Allen made a delightful choice in selecting a charming low cottage on 5th Street for his family. After returning to Richmond, Edgar Allan Poe began his education at the school of Joseph H. Clark. As a boy, Poe exhibited a playful spirit typical of youth. However, his demeanor set him apart from his peers. He was marked by a strong sense of self-respect, devoid of haughtiness, and was notably just and correct in his interactions with fellow playmates. This quality made him well-liked, even among those older than him. Poe's strongest passion appeared to be an enthusiastic love for everything he pursued. In discussions with classmates, he was steadfast and would not back down from his convictions until he was convinced by sound reasoning. As a scholar, he aimed high, and though he wasn't overtly studious, he consistently performed well in his classes. His imaginative abilities often took precedence over his other skills, which was evident in his youthful compositions addressed to his young female friends. He was known for his sensitive and tender heart and made every effort to support his friends. Additionally, he received special training in elocution and excelled in a competition among Richmond's most promising boys. At that time, Poe was in excellent physical shape, and it was often recounted how he swam 6 miles across the James River against the tide. He was a capable boxer and a swift runner, chosen to represent his school in various competitions. His schoolmates spoke highly of his talents, but it was also noted that he didn't fit the traditional mold of popularity. His family background, particularly his parents' careers as actors, influenced how his peers perceived him, often leading to reluctance in accepting his leadership. Despite this, it's important to recognize that the prejudice surrounding theatrical families was deeply rooted in society, a situation that persisted from his parents' generation. Nevertheless, Poe cultivated meaningful friendships. He shared close ties with Robert Solly, whose father had acted alongside Poe's mother in the Virginia Company, as well as Rob Standard. Standard's mother, Helen, served as a steadfast source of support for Poe, and he held her in high regard. It is clear that she was an inspiration for his poem To Helen, written in 1848, as she provided comfort during his early sorrows. Even after her passing, he maintained the practice of visiting her grave nightly, and To Helen endures as one of the most beautiful tributes ever crafted by a man for a woman. Moreover, perceptions of Poe as an isolated and brooding young poet overlook his active participation in typical boyhood activities. He took part in thespian performances with classmates, proudly donning the uniform of the Junior Morgan Riflemen, a volunteer company. With a natural affinity for the theater, it was only logical for Poe to pursue acting. Unfortunately, in November, challenges arose regarding the plays the boys' troops were selected for. Compounding these challenges, John Allen's business affairs reached a crisis point in 1822. By 1824, the partnership of Alice and Allen dissolved by mutual consent, prompting the family to relocate to a property that belonged to John Allen's uncle, which appeared to have been passed down to him. A letter from John Allen to Henry Poe addressed the growing tensions between John and Edgar.
Dear Henry, I have just seen your letter of the 25th to Edgar, and am much afflicted that he has not written you. He has had little else to do for me. He does nothing and seems quite miserable, sulky and ill-tempered to all the family. How we have acted to produce this is beyond my conception. Why I have put up so long with his conduct is little less wonderful. The boy possesses not a spark of affection for us, not a particle of gratitude for all my care and kindness towards him. I have given a much superior education than ever I received myself. If Rosalie has to rely on any affection from him, God in his mercy preserve her. I fear his associates have led him to adopt a line of thinking and acting very contrary to what he possessed when in England. I feel proudly the difference between your principles and his, and have my desire to stand as I ought to do in your estimation. Had I done my duty as faithfully to my God as I have to Edgar, then had death come when he will, had no terrors for me. But I must end this with a devout wish, that God may yet bless him and you, and that success may crown all your endeavors, and between you, your poor sister Rosalie may not suffer. At least she is half your sister, and God forbid, my dear Henry, that we should visit upon the living the errors and frailties of the dead. Believe me, dear Henry, we take an affectionate interest in your destinies, and our united prayers will be that the God of heaven will bless and protect you. Rely on him, my brave and excellent boy, who is willing and ready to save to the uttermost. May he keep you in danger preserve. You always is the prayer of your friend and servant, John Allen.
A letter from John Allen to Henry Poe addressed the growing tensions between John and Edgar. In this correspondence, dated the 25th, it seems Edgar may have become aware of unsettling rumors regarding John Allen's infidelities. Naturally, a 15-year-old boy would feel indignant about the treatment of his foster mother, which likely contributed to Edgar's portrayal as a sulking and ill-tempered youth. Though not without flaws, Edgar was grappling with feelings of insecurity within the Allen household and was starting to comprehend this reality. Additionally, it's possible that his mood was influenced by his romantic feelings for Elmira Royster. Following the passing of John Allen's uncle, their financial situation shifted, resulting in newfound wealth for Allen. Poe did not have a strong desire for money. He was not extravagant by nature, while John Allen even meticulously recorded the few cents spent on postage for letters sent by Edgar and Rosalie. However, Poe enjoyed a room on the second floor that boasted a lovely view of the river and the surrounding landscape. The wide porch featured telescopes brought from England by John Allen, allowing Poe to embark on his first stargazing lessons. Unfortunately, this enriching experience lasted only a few months before he transitioned to the University of Virginia. University of Virginia. The founding principle of the University of Virginia was to cultivate the reasoning skills of its youth, promote moral growth, and instill the virtues of order and reflection. This vision was rooted in admiration for Thomas Jefferson's commitment to education and aimed to foster a nonsectarian environment. The inaugural faculty included many distinguished scholars, and as the university's reputation flourished, Poe became part of a vibrant academic community. By his second session, he was ranked number 136 out of a total enrollment of 177 students, who were encouraged to choose their own studies and evaluate their progress through final examinations. In May 1826, Poe wrote to John Allen about the challenging conditions at the university.
I this morning received the clothes you sent me, viz. An uniform coat, 6 yards of striped cloth for pantaloons, and 4 pair of socks. The coat is a beautiful one and fits me exactly. I thought it best not to write till I received the clothes, or I should have written before this. You have heard no doubt of the disturbances in college. Soon after you left here, the grand jury met and put the students in a terrible fright, so much so that the lectures were unattended, and those whose names were upon the sheriff's list, traveled off into the woods and mountains, taking their beds and provisions along with them. There were about 50 on the list, so you may suppose the college was very well thinned. This was the first day of the fright. The second day, a proclamation was issued by the faculty forbidding any student under pain of a major punishment to leave his dormitory between the hours of 8 and 10 a.m., at which time the sheriffs would be about, or in any way to resist the lawful authority of the sheriffs. This order, however, was very little attended to, as the fear of the faculty could not counterbalance that of the grand jury. Most of the indicted ran off a second time into the woods, and upon an examination the next morning by the faculty, some were reprimanded, some suspended, and one expelled. James Albert Clark from Manchester, I went to school with him at Berks, was suspended for 2 months. Armstead Carter from this neighborhood, for the remainder of the session, and Thomas Barkley forever.
In September, Poe's second letter, after dwelling on the coming examinations, gives details of a still more brutal nature.
We have had a great many fights up here lately. The faculty expelled Wycliffe last night for general bad conduct, but more especially for biting one of the students' arms with whom he was fighting. I saw the whole affair. It took place before my door. Wycliffe was much the stronger but not content with that. After getting the other completely in his power, he began to bite. I saw the arm afterwards, and it was really a serious matter. It was bitten from the shoulder to the elbow, and it is likely that pieces of flesh as large as my hand will be obliged to be cut out. He is from Kentucky, the same one that was in suspension when you were up here some time ago. Give my love to Ma and Miss Nancy. I remain yours affectionately.
Although Jefferson had hoped that a self-governing student body would be effective, it became clear that additional structure was necessary, leading faculty to take charge of discipline by the end of the first year. While regulations were set against card playing and dueling, student behavior often defied these limits. Jefferson envisioned the university as an embodiment of human reason and personal liberty, inspiring a sense of community among students and faculty alike. To address misconduct, a student-run board of censors was established, allowing students to handle issues, except in extreme cases like dueling. However, the system soon faced challenges. Attendance at the university became a status symbol, with some students more focused on establishing their social standing than pursuing knowledge. These students often saw themselves as independent Southern gentlemen and frequently resisted the university's efforts to impose regulations. Engagement in festivities, gambling, and horse racing became common, alongside disruptive behaviors like lighting firecrackers and creating disturbances to bother professors. Unfortunately, such actions led to harmful outcomes, including property vandalism and conflicts with professors and fellow students. Rather than strengthening community ties, such dissent heightened the disconnect among students from university expectations. In some instances, this culminated in outright rebellion, with students rioting, damaging property, and disrupting the educational environment. As Poe's time at the university concluded, he faced an uncertain future. While Poe maintained an impressive academic record, John Allen made the decision not to allow him to return home. Allen also opted not to pay certain debts, which have been estimated by Thomas H. Ellis to amount to $2,500. It is important to examine Ellis's statement closely, as it serves as the basis for these claims. He initially recorded this in his manuscript in 1875 and later expanded on it in an article published in the Richmond Standard on May 7, 1881. In his account, he mentions that Mr. Allen went up to Charlottesville, inquired into Edgar's situation, paid all debts he considered necessary, and chose not to cover some gambling debts, which Mr. James Galt indicated to me, before his passing, amounted to about $2,500. The estimate regarding the gambling debts hinges on statements made by James Galt. In a letter from Poe to John Allen written from West Point in 1831, Poe sought assistance from Galt for his regular expenses, which was not granted. Galt's position as an executor and contingent beneficiary of John Allen's will suggest he may have had biases. Consequently, it's possible he inflated the debt amount in order to rationalize the denial of Poe's request for support. Wertenbaker, drawing on Poe's recollections from 44 years earlier, suggested the debts were actually around $2,000, indicating that the true amount may remain uncertain. It is essential to consider Poe's perspective. He wrote a letter to Allen defending himself against accusations made by Allen.
You may probably urge that you have given me a liberal education. I will leave the decision of that question to those who know how far liberal educations can be obtained in 8 months at the University of Virginia. Here you will say that it was my own fault that I did not return. You would not let me return because bills were presented you for payment which I never wished nor desired you to pay. Had you let me return, my reformation had been sure, as my conduct the last 8 months gave every reason to believe, and you would never have heard more of my extravagances. But I am not about to proclaim myself guilty of all that has been alleged against me, and which I have hitherto endured, simply because I was too proud to reply. I will boldly say that it was wholly and entirely your own mistaken parsimony that caused all the difficulties in which I was involved while at Charlottesville. The expenses of the institution at the lowest estimate were $350 per annum. You sent me there with $110. Of this, $50 were to be paid immediately for board, $60 for attendance upon 2 professors, and you even then did not miss the opportunity of abusing me because I did not attend 3. Then $15 more were to be paid for room rent. Remember that all this was to be paid in advance with $110. $12 more for a bed, and $12 more for room furniture. I had, of course, the mortification of running in debt for public property, against the known rules of the institution, and was immediately regarded in the light of a beggar. You will remember that in a week after my arrival, I wrote to you for some more money, and for books, you replied in terms of the utmost abuse. If I had been the vilest wretch on earth, you could not have been more abusive than you were because I could not contrive to pay $150 with $110. I had enclosed to you in my letter, according to your express commands, an account of the expenses incurred amounting to $149. The balance to be paid was $39. You enclosed me $40, leaving me $1 in pocket. In a short time afterwards, I received a packet of books consisting of Gil Blas and the Cambridge Mathematics in 2 vols. Books for which I had no earthly use since I had no means of attending the mathematical lectures. But books must be had, if I intended to remain at the institution, and they were bought accordingly upon credit. In this manner debts were accumulated, and money borrowed of Jews in Charlottesville at extravagant interest, for I was obliged to hire a servant, to pay for wood, for washing, and 1,000 other necessaries. It was then that I became dissolute, for how could it be otherwise? I could associate with no students except those who were in a similar situation with myself, cared for me, or loved me. I call God to witness that I have never loved dissipation. Those who know me know that my pursuits and habits are very far from anything of the kind. But I was drawn into it by my companions. Even their professions of friendship, hollow as they were relief. Towards the close of the session you sent me $100, but it was too late to be of any service in extricating me from my difficulties. I kept it for some time, thinking that if I could obtain more I could yet retrieve my character. I applied to James Galt, but he, I believe, from the best of motives refused to lend me any. I then became desperate and gambled until I finally involved myself irretrievably. If I have been to blame in all this, place yourself in my situation, and tell me if you would not have been equally so. But these circumstances were all unknown to my friends when I returned home. They knew that I had been extravagant, but that was all. I had no hope of returning to Charlottesville, and I waited in vain in expectation that you would, at least, obtain me some employment.
Poe's explanations regarding the charges from the university are accurate and may even be understated. During the first 4 years, from 1825 to 1829, it was expected that each student would contribute $150 for their board. This amount covered the costs for the attendance, which Poe evidently struggled to pay. After Poe had left the university, 2 letters from George W. Spotswood were sent to Allen, and the second letter is worth mentioning as it reiterates the request made in the first. There seems to have been an almost meanness in one of the actions to which Poe refers, the abusing of the boy because he did not take 3 courses instead of 2. There was a provision of the university requiring a student in the academic schools to register in 3 of them, unless the parents requested permission for him to take a smaller number. If the rule was enforced, Allen had it called to his attention, and he must either have given his consent, or else he demanded that Poe register for another class, knowing that he did not have the necessary funds. A noticeable change appeared in John Allen's relations with Edgar Poe. It seems likely that Allen wanted to remove Poe from Richmond as inexpensively as possible, fearing that Poe might discover or reveal certain actions of his that have already been discussed. While we should consider the bitterness in Poe's 1831 letter, especially in contrast to the affectionate tone of the 2 letters from 1826, the main facts he presented remain indisputable. It's possible that Mrs. Allen secretly sent him some financial assistance. Certainly, Poe seems to have enjoyed some phases of his university career. He took long walks in the neighborhood, which are reflected in A Tale of the Ragged Mountains. This story begins during the fall of the year 1827, while residing near Charlottesville, Virginia. The main plot of the story has no connection with the university, but Poe's own wandering inspired the description of the hero, Bedloe, and the haze of Indian summer, which prepared Bedloe for his curious dream. Jefferson's strong interest in landscape gardening was evident as early as 1826, when he began planning for the more intentional beautification of the campus through the planting of trees and shrubs. The idea of the landscape garden may stem from the memories of a young boy observing the Proctors' efforts in this area. Ellison, the character who appreciates artificial beauty and drives this story, possesses some notable traits reminiscent of Poe. Additionally, his name may connect to a historical context in which the name Ellis is prominently associated. With the close of Poe's term at the University of Virginia, his regular education was over. In December, Mr. Allen brought Edgar home and temporarily placed him in the Ellis and Allen counting room, where they were winding up their previous business, to provide him with a foundational understanding of bookkeeping, accounting, and commercial correspondence. Edgar Poe was troubled for a deeper reason. When he returned from university, he found out that his beloved romance with Elmira Royster had suddenly ended. His sadness might have been heightened by his imagination, but the pride of a young lover was truly hurt. For a sensitive young man, it is often hard to tell the difference between feeling wronged and feeling real grief. The Valentine collection includes a manuscript by Edward V. Valentine that captures a conversation with Mrs. Sarah Elmira Royster Shelton from 1875, after she had become a widow. While the account is secondhand, which limits its completeness, it offers a direct and informal tone that enhances its sense of authenticity. This glimpse into their discussion provides valuable insights into her life and perspective during that time.
He was a beautiful boy, not very talkative. When he did talk, though, he was pleasant, but his general manner was sad. He was devoted to the first Mrs. Allen and she to him. We lived opposite to Poe on Fifth. I made his acquaintance so. Our acquaintance was kept up until he left to go to the university, and during the time he was at the university he wrote to me frequently, but my father intercepted the letters because we were too young, no other reason. He never addressed any poems to me. It distresses me to see anything written in a scurrilous manner in regard to him. Don't believe 1/10 part of what they say. A great part caused by jealousy and envy. I have the greatest respect for his memory. He was very generous. On Churchill, a female acquaintance called to see me and made a coarse remark, and Poe said, "I am surprised you should associate with anyone who would make such a remark." He had strong prejudices. Hated anything coarse and unrefined. Never spoke of his parents. He was kind to his sister as far as in his power. He was as warm and zealous in any cause he was interested in, very enthusiastic and impulsive. I was about 15 or 16 when he first addressed me, and I engaged myself to him, and I was not aware that he wrote to me until I was married to Mr. Shelton when I was 17.
On Saturday, March 24, 1827, Edgar Poe left Richmond, leaving behind everything he knew. It is unclear how he got the money for this important journey. Many believe that John Allen did not provide it. Perhaps Mrs. Allen helped him instead. As he left, Poe was saying goodbye to a home where he had been treated like a son for many years. From Poe's letters and from others, it is clear that Mrs. Allen truly cared for him, and he valued her just as much. Edgar Poe returned to his birthplace in April 1827. This marked his first independent endeavor, likely inspired by Boston's reputation as a literary and publishing hub. The details of his life during the next 2 months are unclear. T.H. Ellis, in his manuscript, states, "The story of his going to St. Petersburg, etc., was all an invention." The occasional letters he wrote home bear a St. Petersburg date, but were actually written while he was performing on stage in Boston or serving as an enlisted soldier. While it would be fascinating to speculate about Edgar Poe's theatrical career, we must treat Ellis's testimony with caution, as it lacks additional verification. However, since he was accurate regarding Poe's military service, it is possible that he was also right about Poe's attempt to pursue acting. Given Poe's family background in the theater and his own amateur performances in Richmond, it seems plausible that he would have ventured down this path. Unfortunately, a thorough examination of Boston's newspapers from that period reveals only one potential piece of evidence. On April 24, 1827, an advertisement appeared for Foundling of the Forest, noting the part of Bertrand performed by a young gentleman of Boston, his first appearance on any stage, who has politely proffered his services on the occasion. The reference to a young gentleman of Boston might dismiss the possibility, but we must remember that Poe later published his first book as by a Bostonian, suggesting he was trying to leverage his tenuous connections with his hometown. Regrettably, playbills from that time in Boston are very rare, and those examined provide no definitive evidence. If Poe did attempt to pursue a stage career, it likely ended in failure. It is clear he was not eager to continue down this path when he enlisted in the United States Army as a private soldier on May 26, 1827. Under an alias, Edgar A. Perry, and his claim that he was 22, despite being underage at the time, indicate he was trying to escape his circumstances. He falsely stated that he worked as a clerk, but he may have briefly secured such a position. He was assigned to Battery H of the 1st Artillery at Fort Independence in Boston Harbor. Poe's artillery unit was later assigned to Fort Moultrie on Sullivan's Island, although he did not set sail until November 8, arriving on November 18. He remained at Fort Moultrie until December 1828, when his unit moved on to Fortress Monroe in Virginia. Although his social interactions in Charleston were limited, this period played a crucial role in Poe's artistic development and his ongoing exploration of deep themes. In March 1830, Edgar Allan Poe received an appointment, which was facilitated by Powhatan Ellis, a senator from Mississippi. Poe's foster father, John Allan, formally consented to this appointment on March 31. During this time, Poe's correspondence with Allan came to a halt, suggesting a temporary reconciliation between them. This might have been Poe's last opportunity to enjoy a sense of home. In a letter dated May 3, 1830, addressed to an Army comrade named Bully Graves and written from Richmond, Poe noted that he had not been in Washington for some time. This letter was in response to Graves' request for the repayment of money owed to him by Poe, who had served as his substitute in the Army. Graves later forwarded this letter to John Allan, which resulted in further tensions between Poe and Allan. In Poe's reply to Allan, he included a defense that also served as an attack, claiming that Allan was often not sober. That summer, he published Tamerlane and Other Poems, credited to a Bostonian, showcasing his early exploration of themes that would characterize much of his work: pride, love, beauty, and death. Poe's fascination with beauty and his constant contemplation of love and mortality are apparent in his poetry. The release of Tamerlane reflects his growing confidence in his unique voice and the originality he sought to convey. Tamerlane and Other Poems had very little impact on critics or readers. It was noted by 2 magazines, but without any critical commentary. Remarkably, what started as a modest publication, selling for just 12.5 cents, has now become one of the most sought-after and valuable books in literary history. The region surrounding Charleston left a lasting impression on Poe, particularly as it inspired his writing of The Gold Bug. As was typical for him, Poe drew on local characteristics but modified the scenery and other elements to fit his narrative. The description of Sullivan's Island at the beginning of The Gold Bug is generally accurate. The picturesque ruins of Fort Moultrie, as they existed in Poe's time, still remain, but the new fort and the numerous houses that now surround it present a drastically different landscape from what he once knew. The myrtles, especially on the eastern end of the island, are still present, though they are not the European variety that Poe described. They are a local species instead. Poe attributes some of his own traits and habits to his character Legrand, who is portrayed as someone who saunters along the beach and through the myrtles in quest of shells or entomological specimens. Poe's acceptance in 1839 of the task to rewrite Wyatt's textbook on conchology underscores his interest in shells, which likely began during this period. In 1826, Dr. Edmund Ravenel, a notable conchologist, lived on Sullivan's Island, and it seems very likely that Poe had discussions with him, which may have inspired his work. The gold bug described in Edgar Allan Poe's story is, at first glance, entirely fictitious, as no such beetle exists. However, it has been suggested that Poe combined characteristics of 2 local beetles to create a new one that suited his narrative. Poe often displayed an almost mischievous enjoyment in the inaccuracies of non-essential details. Sullivan's Island remained a vivid memory for Edgar Allan Poe. In The Balloon Hoax, the travelers crossing the ocean land on the beach, noting that, the tide being out, the sand was hard, smooth, and admirably adapted for a descent. In the oblong box, Charleston serves merely as a departure point. However, it was not the city itself, but rather the surroundings of Fort Moultrie and the shadows of the dense South Carolina woods that left a lasting impression on Poe. Poe had already concluded that he was wasting his time in the Army. On December 1st, while under orders to sail from Fort Moultrie, he wrote to John Allen in the tone of a repentant son, asking for permission to withdraw from the service. It is evident that previous correspondence had taken place, as Poe expressed great concern for Mr. Allen's recovery from an indisposition, suggesting there had been a dispute between them. Despite his military experience, Poe remained confident in his potential for success. One particular sentence reads, "The period of an enlistment is 5 years. The prime of my life would be wasted. I shall be driven to more decisive measures if you refuse to assist me." This reveals a combination of his plea for help and vague threats, which represents one of his less appealing moods. He also sent his dearest love to Ma and expressed hope that she will not let my wayward disposition wear away the love she used to have for me. Allen did not respond to this letter. Shortly after Poe arrived at Fortress Monroe, he wrote again, restating his earlier message, addressing Allen as his father and signing himself as your affectionate son. This letter, too, went unanswered. Poe served as an artificer from May 1, 1828, until January 1, 1829, when he was promoted to the rank of Sergeant Major, the highest non-commissioned grade in the Army, which reflects the competence with which he fulfilled his duties. On February 4th, he humbled his pride by asking Mr. Allen to use his influence to secure him an appointment as a cadet at West Point. He acknowledged his infamous conduct at the University of Virginia, but excused it by citing his youth. In this letter, he sends his love to his foster mother for the last time. On February 28, 1829, Frances Allen died, and since Poe arrived at Richmond on leave, the day after the funeral, John Allen must have relented sufficiently to send him some money and join in his request for a furlough. The death of the woman who was the chief bond between them must have resulted in some form of reconciliation. Gathered from what is left of Poe's letter, written to Allen on March 10, 1829, from Fortress Monroe. It begins with, "My dear Pa," and concludes with, "Yours affectionately." The tone of the letter resembles that of his early correspondence from the University of Virginia, conveying the feelings of a trusting son to a father who is preparing to help him secure a discharge from the Army and an appointment to West Point. 2 sentences in the letter are particularly noteworthy. "If it were not for the late occurrences, I should feel much happier than I have for a long time. I have had a fearful warning and have hardly ever known before what distress was." These words can only refer to the death of Mrs. Allen. While Army records show that Poe was present at Fortress Monroe on the day of her death and could not have seen her, it's possible that a last message stirred feelings of remorse within him. Regardless of how John Allen treated him, a sensitive and impressionable young man like Poe would naturally feel guilty about neglecting his foster mother during his 2 years of Army service. We do not know how often he wrote to her, but there is no mention of letters from him to Mrs. Allen in his correspondence with Allen. With Allen's consent, the necessary proceedings for his discharge went ahead smoothly. The letter from Poe's colonel is of interest because it reflects a mix of fact and fiction, containing information from both Poe and John Allen. Fortress Monroe, March 30th, 29. General, I request your permission to discharge from the service Edgar A. Perry, at present the Sergeant Major of the 1st Regiment of Artillery, on his procuring a substitute. The said Perry is one of a family of orphans whose unfortunate parents were the victims of the conflagration of the Richmond Theater in 1809. The subject of this letter was taken under the protection of a Mr. Allen, a gentleman of wealth and respectability of that city, who, as I understand, adopted his protege as his son and heir. With the intention of giving him a liberal education, he had placed him at the University of Virginia, from which, after considerable progress in his studies, in a moment of youthful indiscretion he absconded, and was not heard from by his patron for several years. In the meantime he became reduced to the necessity of enlisting into the service, and accordingly entered as a soldier in my regiment at Fort Independence in 1827. Since the arrival of his company at this place, he has made his situation known to his patron, at whose request the young man has been permitted to visit him. The result is an entire reconciliation on the part of Mr. Allen, who reinstates him into his family in favor. Page 135. Smiley face, and who in a letter I have received from him requests that his son may be discharged on procuring a substitute. An experienced soldier and approved sergeant is ready to take the place of Perry so soon as his discharge can be obtained. The good of the service, therefore, cannot be materially injured by the exchange. 24. I have the honor to be, with great respect, your obedient servant. Des House, Colonel First Arty. To the General commanding the E Department, USA. New York. Under Special Order Number 28, dated April 4, 1829, Sergeant Major Edgar A. Perry was discharged on April 15. According to the records of the War Department, Sergeant Samuel Graves of Company H enlisted on April 17, 1829, and served as a substitute for Sergeant Major Perry. Poe's usual bad luck followed him in this process. He explained to John Allen later, when his conduct was questioned, that an officer commanding a company could, at his discretion, enlist the first recruit who offered and mustered him in as a substitute for a retiring soldier, paying only the normal bounty of $12. However, since Colonel House and Lieutenant Howard were both absent, this arrangement could not be executed. Then, Poe made one of those mistakes that he would later describe in his own words. As I had told you, it would only cost me $12. I did not want to impose on you. So when a substitute offered for $75, I gave him $25 and wrote him a note for the balance. When you sent me $100, thinking I would have more than enough, I decided it was my best opportunity to pay off my note, which I did. For a man like Allen, who was meticulous in his accounts and kept every scrap of paper related to his business, this concealment was a betrayal. Apparently knowing nothing of it when Poe arrived in Richmond. Before he left his post, Poe collected the following testimonials from his officers to accompany his application to West Point. Fortress Monroe, Virginia, April 20, 1829. Edgar Poe, former Sergeant Major in the 1st Artillery, served under my command in Company H of the 1st Regiment of Artillery from June 1827 to January 1829. During this time, his conduct was exemplary. He effectively performed the duties of company clerk and assistant in the subsistence department, both of which were carried out promptly and faithfully. His habits are good, and he is completely free from drinking. J. Howard, Lieutenant, 1st Artillery. In addition to the above, I want to state that Edgar Poe was appointed Sergeant Major of the 1st Artillery on January 1, 1829, and up to this date, has displayed exemplary deportment and has been prompt and faithful in the discharge of his duties. He is highly worthy of confidence. H. W. Griswold, Brevet Captain and Adjutant, 1st Artillery. I have known and observed the conduct of Sergeant Major Poe for about 3 months, during which his behavior has been highly praiseworthy and deserving of confidence. His education is of a very high standard, and he appears to be free from bad habits. In fact, the testimonies of Lieutenant Howard and Adjutant Griswold fully support this point. I understand that he is seeking a cadet's warrant through his friends, and I unhesitatingly recommend him as someone who will diligently and faithfully fulfill the obligations of that position. W. Jagworth, Lieutenant Colonel, commanding Fortress Monroe. Poe took these credentials with him to Washington early in May to present to Major John Eaton, the Secretary of War. John Allen also wrote a letter of introduction, and the coldness of his tone stood in marked contrast to that of Poe's officers.
Richmond, May 6, 1829. Dr. Sir, the youth who presents this letter is the same individual referred to by Lieutenant Howard, Captain Griswold, Colonel Worth, our representative and speaker, the Honorable Andrew Stevenson, and my friend Major John Campbell. He left my care due to some gambling issues at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, likely because I refused to endorse a rule adopted by local shopkeepers and others that made debts of honor out of indiscretions. I am pleased to assert that he performed excellently on his examinations at the end of the year. His history is brief. He is the grandson of Quartermaster General Poe of Maryland, whose widow, as I understand it, still receives a pension for her husband's services or disabilities. I must clarify that he is no relation to me whatsoever. I have many in whom I have taken an active interest to promote their futures. My concern is simply for every man in distress. For myself, I ask for nothing, but I kindly request your assistance in promoting this young man's future prospects. It would bring me great pleasure to reciprocate any kindness you may show him. I apologize for my frankness. I write to you as a soldier. Your obedient servant, John Allen.
While waiting in Baltimore for the results of his application, Edgar Allan Poe sought out his relatives, many of whom he had not previously connected with, and made additional contacts. In a letter dated May 20th, 1829, to John Allan from Baltimore, Poe expressed that he was well received by men who had known his grandfather. He also rekindled his acquaintance with William Wirt, who had been offered the presidency and the professorship of law at the University of Virginia during Poe's time there. Wirt had just returned to Baltimore after a distinguished career as the Attorney General of the United States, but it was likely his fame as the biographer of Patrick Henry that encouraged Poe to share his literary aspirations with him. Wirt treated Poe with great courtesy, read Poe's poem Al-Araf in one sitting, and recommended that he consult Robert Walsh, the editor of the American Quarterly Review, and Judge Joseph Hopkinson, both of whom were influential literary figures in Philadelphia. Although Wirt found Al-Araf puzzling, he generously attributed this difficulty to his own perceived shortcomings as a critic of poetry, predicting that the poem would please modern readers. Poe then took his manuscript to Philadelphia and submitted it to Isaac Leah of Cary, Leah and Cary, one of the leading publishers of the time. The letter that accompanied the manuscript is of particular interest and has never been published. Although it is undated, it received a response on May 27, 1829, making it the earliest known letter from Poe outside of the Valentine letters. Of great interest are the statements concerning the origin of Al-Araf and its meaning, which, to save repetition, I shall discuss in my later analysis of the poem. But even more important is the fact that Poe sends only parts first, second, and third, although he has part fourth written. Evidently, we do not have all of Al-Araf. The boy of 20 was still confident, notwithstanding all his experiences. Succeed or not, I am irrecoverably a poet. Though others doubted, he knew. Poe's letter of May 29, 1829, to Allen tells of his hopes.
From someone like Mr. Wirt, the flattering remarks he has made about my work will surely serve as a recommendation for you. In the conclusion of his letter, he advises me to obtain a personal introduction to Mr. Walsh, the editor of the American Quarterly Review, and to gain his support. Fortunately, I have already garnered Mr. Walsh's interest, as well as his highest praise for the poem. As the editor of the review, he has promised to feature it, which should ensure its success, if not its popularity. Given these circumstances, I felt it necessary to write to you. I believe you are impartial and, if you see fit, you will assist me. At my age, it is important to be in the public eye. Once I am noticed, I can easily carve a path to reputation. Supporting me in this endeavor will not conflict with any of your other interests. I understand that getting a poem published in this country is challenging, as both Mr. Wirt and Mr. Walsh have informed me. However, this difficulty should not deter us from pursuing a proper goal. If Messrs. Cary, Leah, and Cary decline to publish my work, which I have no reason to believe they will, as they have consistently rejected all American poets, I request that you provide me with a letter to them stating that, should they incur any loss from publishing the poem Al-Araf, you will cover it. The cost of publishing the work in a style that matches any of our American publications will be about $100. Therefore, this should be the maximum potential loss, assuming no copies are sold at all. It is likely that the work will be profitable and that I could even gain financially from it. Additionally, I would like to mention that I have long since moved on from using Byron as a model, for which I believe I deserve some credit. If you decide to assist me, I will be forever grateful for your kindness. If you choose to give me a chance, please enclose the letter to Messrs. Cary, Leah, and Cary. I will anxiously await your response. Allen has noted on this letter, I replied on Monday, June 8, 1829, strongly criticizing his conduct and refusing any assistance. The manuscript was at least received by the publishers, likely due to Poe's mention of Mr. Walsh's willingness to introduce him to the firm. When Poe writes to Allen on June 25, the firm still has the poem. The same note reveals another unfortunate turn of events. Poe tells Allen that his foster father objected to his request for additional funds. I will clarify the situation. I was robbed at Beltshoover's hotel while I slept in the same room as the thief, who took all the money I had with me, about $46. I managed to recover $10 by searching his pockets the following night, after he acknowledged the theft. I have been unsuccessfully trying to obtain the remaining amount from him. He claims he does not have it and begs me not to expose him. Out of respect for his wife, I will keep this matter private. I have a letter from him regarding this issue, which I will show you when I arrive in Richmond. I have been careful with my expenses, and I used $50 of the money you sent me to pay off a debt I incurred at Old Point for my substitute, which I noted in a promissory note.
The robber was his second cousin, James Mosher Poe, son of Jacob Poe. It is evident that Poe was not yet living with his relatives. In his letter dated July 15th, he expresses his desire to return home through Washington, stating, "I am very anxious to return home through Washington when I have every hope of being appointed for September. Additionally, being delayed in Baltimore is causing me unnecessary expenses, as my grandmother is not in a position to provide me with accommodation." We can infer the nature of Allen's letters from Poe's reply on July 26th, which reveals Allen's growing coldness.
Dear Pa, I received yours of the 19th on the 22D Alto and am truly thankful for the money which you sent me, notwithstanding the taunt with which it was given, that men of genius ought not to apply to your aid. It is too often their necessity to want that little timely assistance which would prevent such applications. I did not answer your letter by return of mail on account of my departure for Washington the next morning. But before I proceed to tell the event of my application, I think it my duty to say something concerning the accusations and suspicions which are contained in your letter. After giving his explanation of the matter of the substitute, already quoted, Poe continues, "If you will take into consideration the length of time I have been from home, which was occasioned by my not hearing from you, and I was unwilling to leave the city without your answer, expecting it every day, and other expenses, you will find that it has been impossible for me to enter into any extravagancies or improper expense. Even supposing I had not lost the $46, the time which intervened between my letter and your answer in the first instance was 22 days, in the latter 1 month and 4 days. As I had no reason to suppose you would not reply to my letter as I was unconscious of having offended, it would have been imprudent to leave without your answer. This expense was unavoidable. As regards the money which was stolen, I have sent you the only proof in my possession, a letter from Mosher, in which there is an acknowledgment of the theft. I have no other. On receiving your last letter, I went immediately to Washington on foot, and have returned the same way, having paid away $40 for my bill and being unwilling to spend the balance when I might avoid it, until I could see what prospects were in view."
Poe cannot be accused of being extravagant, and his decision to walk to Washington demonstrates his determination to secure the appointment. After providing a detailed account of his interview with Secretary Eaton, who informed him that there were still 10 names ahead of his on the list, Poe concludes,
"Having now explained every circumstance that seemed to require an explanation and shown that I have spared no exertions in the pursuit of my object, I write to you for information as to what course I must pursue. I would have returned home immediately but for the words in your letter, I am not particularly anxious to see you. I know not how to interpret them. I could not help thinking that they amounted to a prohibition to return. If I had any means of support until I could obtain the appointment, I would not trouble you again. I am conscious of having offended you formerly, greatly, but I thought that had been forgiven, at least you told me so. I know that I have done nothing since to deserve your displeasure. As regards the poem, I have offended only in asking your approbation. I can publish it upon the terms you mentioned, but will have no more to do with it without your entire approbation. I will wait with great anxiety for your answer. You must be aware how important it is that I should hear from you soon, as I do not know how to act."
Poe still thought of the Allen residence as home, and he was puzzled because Allen evidently was not anxious to have him return. If John Allen's own statements in his will are to be credited, there were probably reasons, to be discussed later, why Allen was quite willing to have Poe out of Richmond. In the meantime, Poe was active in securing the publication of his new volume of poems. Allen did not reply to Poe's letter of July 26, so Poe wrote again and evidently received some help. His acknowledgment of August 10th contains an interesting picture of his family relations.
Baltimore, August 10th, 1829. Dear Pa, I received yours this morning, which relieved me from more trouble than you can well imagine. I was afraid that you were offended, and although I knew that I had done nothing to deserve your anger, I was in a most uncomfortable situation without 1 cent of money, in a strange place and so quickly engaged in difficulties after the serious misfortunes which I have just escaped. My grandmother is extremely poor and ill, paralytic, my Aunt Maria, if possible, still worse, and Henry entirely given up to drink and unable to help himself, much less me. I am unwilling to appear obstinate as regards the substitute, so will say nothing more concerning it, only remarking that they will no longer enlist men for the residue of another's enlistment as formerly. Consequently, my substitute was enlisted for 5 years, not 3. I stated in my last letter, to which I refer you, that Mr. Eaton gave me strong hopes for September. At any rate, that the appointment could be obtained for June next. I can obtain decent board, lodging, and washing with other expenses of mending and see for $5 and perhaps even for $4.50 per week, if I obtain the appointment by the last of September. The AMT of expense would be at most $30. If I should be unfortunate and not obtain it until June, I will not desire you to allow as much as that per week, because by engaging for a longer period at a cheap boarding house I can do with much less. Say even $10, even $8 per month. Anything with which you think it possible to exist. I am not so anxious of obtaining money from your good nature as of preserving your good will. I am extremely anxious that you should believe that I have not attempted to impose upon you. I will in the meantime, if you wish it, write you often, but pledge myself to apply for no other assistance than what you shall think proper to allow. I left behind me in Richmond a small trunk containing books and some letters. Will you forward it on to Baltimore to the care of H. W. Bull, Jr., and if you think I may ask so much, perhaps you will put in it for me some few clothes, as I am nearly without. Give my love to Miss Valentine. I remain, dear Pa, yours affectionately, Edgar A. Poe.
As Edgar Allan Poe navigated the tumultuous waters of his early adulthood, his experiences in Baltimore and his strained relationship with John Allan shaped both the man and the poet he would become. Despite facing financial hardships and personal betrayals, Poe's unwavering dedication to his craft never faltered. His time at the University of Virginia, although fraught with challenges, honed his linguistic skills and deepened his appreciation for the beauty of the natural world. Poe's determination to publish Al Arof, Tamerlane, and Minor Poems in 1829 marked the beginning of a literary journey that would leave an indelible mark on American literature. His resilience in the face of adversity, combined with his unique poetic vision, set the stage for the masterpieces that would follow. Reflecting on this period of Poe's life, we see a young man driven by an insatiable desire to express the depths of his imagination, an attribute that would define his legacy for generations to come. In conclusion to this episode, Edgar Allan Poe's early struggles and triumphs in Baltimore were not merely a prelude to his later success, but rather a crucible that forged his identity as one of the most enigmatic and influential figures in literary history. His story is a testament to the power of perseverance and the enduring impact of a singular creative vision. Thank you for joining Macabre Mysteries Episode 2 of our Edgar Allan Poe series. Join us next time for the later years of Edgar Allan Poe.